Chapter 1, Section 1. Identifying points, lines, and planes. So, let's start with points. What is a point? A point, most of the time, represented by a dot, and it doesn't have any dimensions at all. So there's also line, which is of course represented by a normal line. But what in difference between math and art, for example, is that a line goes on forever and has two arrowheads at both extremities. But it doesn't really matter because it never ends. And it also has a difference, really an infinite amount of points. And it has one dimension. But there's also a plane which consists of both lines and points. Which brings us to our next points, collinear and coplanar lines. For example, let's name these dots. Dots A, B, C, and D. Points A and B are collinear points because they're both on the same line. But points C and D aren't. So points A and B are collinear. But points D and C are coplanar. But let's not forget that A and D are also coplanar because they're both on the same plane. Our next point is intersections. There are two kinds of intersections. Intersections between lines, let's call this line L, and intersections between line M. They both meet at one point that we're going to call L. There's also the second kind of intersection, but an intersection between planes. This is plane H, for example. And let's make it intersect on this line that we're going to call L with plane T. Of course, they intersect both at a line and an infinite amount of. Now, we learned about lines and planes and dots, but there's also line segments and rays, and of course, opposing rays. So, a line segment. Well, a line goes on forever and ever and ever, but a line segment has two endpoints and stops one way or another. Let's take, for example, this line segment, A and B. It has two endpoints, but they still have an infinite amount of points in the middle. So, we learned about line segments. Now about rays. What a rays are is that they have a starting point, but no ending points. As you can see, it's also represented by an arrowhead. And it starts but never ends. It can go one way or the other. And those are called opposing rays because they have the same starting points, but they end in opposite directions.